Imagine this. It is the morning of July 11th, 1804. Two men stand on a narrow ledge above the Hudson River in Weehawken, New Jersey. One of them is the sitting Vice President of the United States. The other is the man who almost single-handedly built the American financial system from scratch. In a few seconds, one of them will be dead. And here is the part nobody tells you in school. The Vice President of the United States just committed what two states officially called murder. He walked back to Washington, presided over the Senate, finished his term, and was never convicted of a single crime. How is that even possible in a country that calls itself a republic built on law? That question is exactly where this story begins. And trust me, by the time we reach the end, you are going to see this duel, these two men, and the entire early American Republic in a completely different light. Because this is not just a story about two guys with pistols on a cliff. This is a story about ambition, betrayal, paranoia, and the terrifying possibility that the United States came within one election of becoming something that looked a lot more like a monarchy than a democracy. What the textbooks give you is a clean narrative. Hamilton good, Burr bad. Duel happens, Hamilton dies, the end. But that version leaves out almost everything that actually matters. It leaves out the fact that Aaron Burr was arguably the most brilliant political organizer in American history up to that point. It leaves out the fact that Alexander Hamilton destroyed Burr's career not once, but multiple times, and each time he did it on purpose. It leaves out the fact that the duel itself was the result of years of accumulated rage, political sabotage, and personal humiliation that had been building like a pressure cooker since the earliest days of the Republic. So today, we are going to peel back every layer of this story. We are going to talk about who these men really were before they became myths. We are going to follow the trail of political knives they threw at each other across nearly 2 decades. We are going to stand on that cliff in Weehawken and feel what it actually meant. And then we are going to ask the question that historians still argue about today. Did Hamilton's death save American democracy? Or did it destroy the one man who might have made it something even greater? Let us start at the very beginning, because both of these men came from nowhere, and that matters more than almost anything else about them. Alexander Hamilton was born in 1755 on the island of Nevis in the Caribbean. His mother, Rachel Fawcett, was a woman who had been imprisoned for, quote, whoring, and his father, James Hamilton, abandoned the family when Alexander was still a child. His mother died when he was 13. He was officially listed in church records as a bastard, not a metaphor, literally the word used in legal documents. He was an orphan on a small island with no money, no family name, and no future that anyone could see. What he had was a mind that worked like nothing anyone around him had ever encountered. He read everything. He wrote essays and letters of such startling intelligence that local merchants literally took up a collection to send him to college in New York. Think about that. A teenage orphan from the Caribbean, so obviously brilliant that strangers funded his education just to see what he would become. He arrived in New York around 1773, enrolled at King's College, which later became Columbia University, and within 2 years, he was writing political pamphlets that people mistook for the work of senior statesmen. He was 19 years old. When the Revolutionary War broke out, Hamilton did not hesitate for a single second. He joined the militia, showed such remarkable military ability that George Washington personally recruited him as an aide-de-camp. He became Washington's right hand, his ghostwriter, his analytical engine. He drafted letters, planned logistics, managed intelligence, and did it all while nursing a burning personal ambition that he was careful never to show too openly. He wanted battlefield glory. Washington kept him at a desk. That tension between Hamilton the soldier and Hamilton the administrator would define his entire personality. He was always the smartest man in the room, always doing the work that made other men famous, and always wanting more credit than he received. Physically, Hamilton was striking in a way that made people remember him. He was not tall, around 5 feet 7 inches, which was average for the time, but he had bright, blue-violet eyes, reddish-brown hair worn back from his face, and a kind of electric intensity that made everyone who met him feel like they were being examined and evaluated. John Adams, who hated him, admitted he was handsome. Thomas Jefferson, who also hated him, called him one of the most restless, impatient, artful men he had ever known. Those words were meant as insults, but they are also a pretty good description of what made Hamilton exceptional. Now let us talk about Aaron Burr, because this is where the story gets genuinely complicated, and where the textbook version really starts to fall apart. Aaron Burr was born in 1756 in Newark, New Jersey. His father was the president of Princeton University. His maternal grandfather was Jonathan Edwards, arguably the most famous theologian in American history. If Hamilton came from nothing, Burr came from everything. His pedigree was impeccable. His family connections were vast. And yet, from the very beginning, Burr seemed almost uninterested in the advantages he had been given, at least in the conventional sense. He was brilliant, no question. He graduated from Princeton at 16, which was not even particularly unusual in his family. But where Hamilton's brilliance was volcanic, always erupting, always pushing outward, Burr's intelligence was cool, contained, and strategic. He observed. He waited. He calculated. He had dark, piercing eyes that people consistently described as magnetic or unsettling, depending on whether they liked him. He was slightly shorter than Hamilton, slender, always immaculately dressed, with an almost theatrical charm that he deployed with the precision of a surgeon. Women adored him. Men found him either fascinating or terrifying, and often both at once. Burr also served in the Revolutionary War, and unlike Hamilton, he actually got his battlefield glory, at least for a time.
He distinguished himself at the Battle of Quebec, survived a brutal winter campaign that destroyed half the Continental Army, and rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel by the time he was 21. He was, by every military measure, a genuinely brave and capable officer, but he clashed repeatedly with his superiors, including Washington, and that clash would have consequences that echoed for the rest of his life. Because Washington never forgave a slight, and Burr, for reasons that are still debated, rubbed Washington the wrong way in a way that Hamilton never did. That divide between the man Washington trusted completely and the man Washington never quite embraced was the first fault line in what would become a catastrophic rivalry. After the war, both Hamilton and Burr became lawyers in New York City. They worked in the same legal circles. They occasionally worked on the same cases. They were, by almost every external measure, colleagues, and sometimes almost friends. But underneath that surface, something else was already taking shape. Hamilton entered politics first, and he entered it with a clarity of vision that was almost frightening. He had a plan for America, a specific, detailed, comprehensive plan. He believed the new country needed a strong central government, a national bank, a funded national debt, a manufacturing economy, and a professional financial system that would make the United States credible to European powers. He articulated this vision with such force and such precision that George Washington made him the first Secretary of the Treasury, and Hamilton proceeded to reshape the entire economic architecture of the young nation. The man was 24 years old when the Constitution was ratified. By 32, he had essentially built the modern American economy on paper and then pushed it through a hostile Congress through sheer force of will. But here's the thing about having a vision that powerful and that specific. You make enemies, real enemies. Not just political opponents, but people who see your vision and believe, genuinely believe, that it will destroy the country they want to build. Thomas Jefferson was one of those people. James Madison was another.
They wanted an agrarian republic of small farmers and local governance. Hamilton wanted an industrial commercial empire. These were not differences that could be split down the middle. They were fundamentally incompatible visions of what America was supposed to be. And Aaron Burr? Burr watched this battle between Hamilton and Jefferson with what appeared to be detachment. He built his own political base in New York, famously turning Tammany Hall from a social club into a ferociously effective political machine. He was meticulous about it. He gathered information on voters. He organized them by neighborhood. He made sure people actually went to the polls. This was not how gentlemen politicians in the 1790s operated. This was something new. Something that looked a lot more like modern machine politics than anything the founders had envisioned. And it worked spectacularly. By 1799, Burr had pulled off one of the great political upsets of the era, flipping the New York State legislature from Federalist to Democratic Republican, which effectively handed New York's crucial electoral votes to the Jefferson camp in the upcoming presidential election. Hamilton was furious. Not just politically frustrated, but personally, viscerally furious, because he understood exactly what Burr had done and exactly how he had done it. And it scared him. Burr had demonstrated that raw organizational genius could overpower ideological argument, that numbers mattered more than brilliance, that democracy, taken to its logical conclusion, could be won by whoever was best at counting heads rather than making cases. That fear was legitimate. And it was the beginning of Hamilton's decision to destroy Aaron Burr, completely and permanently, no matter the cost. Because in Hamilton's mind, Aaron Burr was not just a political rival, he was a threat to the Republic itself. A man without fixed principles, willing to use any tool, attach himself to any faction, promise anything to anyone in exchange for power. Hamilton called him dangerous. He called him unprincipled. He called him, in one famous letter, a man who would, if he ever reached the presidency, involve the country in revolution. Those were not casual insults. They were the calculated words of a man who intended to prevent Aaron Burr from ever reaching the highest office in the land. The presidential election of 1800 was, and we need to be very clear about this, one of the strangest and most dangerous moments in American political history. Under the original Constitution, electors cast 2 votes for president, and the candidate with the highest number became president, while the runner-up became vice president. The Democratic Republicans had agreed that Jefferson would be their presidential candidate, and Burr would be their vice presidential candidate. Simple enough in theory, catastrophically complicated in practice. Every single Democratic-Republican elector cast 1 vote for Jefferson and 1 vote for Burr. The result was a perfect tie, 73 votes each, which meant, under the rules, the election went to the House of Representatives to decide. And the House was still controlled in its lame duck session by the Federalists, who hated Jefferson. Some of them began scheming to use the tie to elevate Burr to the presidency instead. And here is the question that hung over everything. Would Burr play along? Would he accept the presidency if the Federalists handed it to him against the clearly understood intention of his own party? Burr's behavior during those weeks in early 1801 is one of the most analyzed and debated episodes in American history. He neither clearly refused the presidency nor clearly accepted it. He wrote letters that were carefully ambiguous. He met with Federalist operatives. He did not do what Jefferson expected him to do, which was to make an unequivocal public statement that he would not serve as president if elected over Jefferson. Whether this was genuine political maneuvering, passive ambition, or simply Burr's characteristic habit of keeping his options open, is something historians have argued about for over 200 years. What is not debatable is what Alexander Hamilton did. Despite being a Federalist, and despite despising Thomas Jefferson personally and ideologically, Hamilton wrote letter after letter to his fellow Federalists insisting that Jefferson had to be chosen over Burr. He called Jefferson misguided, but honest. He called Burr, once again, dangerous. He said that Jefferson at least had principles, even wrong ones, while Burr had none at all. Hamilton argued with passion and relentlessness, and after 36 ballots, the House finally chose Jefferson. Aaron Burr became Vice President of the United States, a position that, in that era, meant almost nothing. Think about what just happened here. The man who had organized the entire political effort that put Jefferson in power, the man who had delivered New York and therefore the election, had been maneuvered out of the presidency by his own supposed ally. And the person who did the maneuvering was Alexander Hamilton.
For the second time, Hamilton had reached into the machinery of American politics and pulled the lever that kept Burr from the prize he wanted. The first time had been back in 1789, when Hamilton used his influence with Washington to prevent Burr from receiving a major diplomatic appointment. Now, he had done it on a national scale. Burr knew it. He knew exactly what Hamilton had done and why. He spent 4 years as Jefferson's vice president, largely ignored, increasingly isolated, watching his influence evaporate. Jefferson dropped him from the ticket for the 1804 election without even the courtesy of a private explanation. So Burr made one last move. He ran for governor of New York as an independent candidate, hoping to use state-level power as a platform for a political comeback. Hamilton opposed him with everything he had, writing and speaking against him, rallying Federalists to support the opposing candidate, painting Burr once again as dangerous and untrustworthy. Burr lost the governor's race in April of 1804. He lost it badly, and in the wreckage of that defeat, he found something that pushed him past the point of political calculation into something rawer and more personal. He found a letter, or rather, a letter was shown to him, a letter published in an Albany newspaper in which a Dr. Charles Cooper reported that Hamilton had expressed, at a dinner party, a very despicable opinion of Aaron Burr, and it said something even more offensive, the specifics of which Cooper said he could detail if pressed. Burr wrote to Hamilton and demanded he account for every instance in which he had spoken disparagingly of him over the course of the previous 14 years. Not just this one dinner, 14 years. He wanted a complete accounting, an apology, a retraction, a public acknowledgement that Hamilton had been wrong to say the things he had said. And Hamilton refused. Not with rage, not with contempt, but with the cool, precise refusal of a man who had decided that giving ground on this would be a kind of self-destruction. He said he could not be responsible for every word attributed to him in casual conversation. He said the demand was impossible to satisfy because it was impossibly broad. That exchange of letters back and forth through June of 1804 is one of the most extraordinary documents in American political history. Both men were lawyers. Both men were brilliant writers. Both men knew exactly what they were doing. Hamilton's letters are masterpieces of non-apology, acknowledging nothing, conceding nothing, phrased in language so careful it seems almost designed to infuriate. Burr's letters escalate with controlled fury, each one tighter and more precisely focused than the last. Reading them is like watching two fences in slow motion, each one probing for an opening, neither one willing to lower his guard. By the end of June, Burr had had enough. He sent the challenge, a formal invitation to a duel, and Hamilton accepted. Now here is a detail that almost nobody knows. Alexander Hamilton had already decided, before he ever set foot on that cliff in Weehawken, that he was not going to fire at Aaron Burr. He wrote it down. He put it in a document he left with his second. He said he considered it wrong to take a human life in a duel, that he had personal and religious objections to dueling, and that he intended to waste his fire, meaning he would deliberately shoot wide or into the air, giving Burr the opportunity to do the same and allowing both men to walk away with their honor intact.
Why did he accept the duel at all if he planned not to fire? That is the question that cuts to the heart of who Hamilton was.
Some historians argue he was suicidal, that he was deeply depressed after the death of his son Philip in a duel just 3 years earlier, after the collapse of his political influence, after the implosion of his affair with Maria Reynolds years before. Others argue he believed that Burr, a rational man, would also waste his fire, that both of them would survive and the matter would be settled. Still others argue Hamilton accepted because to refuse would have been, in the culture of the time, a worse kind of political death than any bullet. And then there is the darkest interpretation, that Hamilton deliberately chose a situation in which he could be martyred, that he understood, with the cold calculation that defined his entire life, that dying by Aaron Burr's hand would accomplish what he could not accomplish in life, permanently destroying Burr's political career and cementing his own legacy as the noble, principled victim. If that sounds monstrous to suggest about a man we revere as a founding father, consider the evidence. Hamilton spent the weeks before the duel writing extensive letters, settling his affairs, arranging his papers, writing detailed explanations of his decision not to fire. These are not the actions of a man who expects to survive. These are the actions of a man preparing his final statement. The morning of July 11th dawned grey and warm over the Hudson. Hamilton crossed from Manhattan by boat. He wore a coat and hat against the early morning chill. His second, Nathaniel Pendleton, carried the pistols, a matched pair of flintlock dueling pistols that belonged to Hamilton's brother-in-law, John Church. Here is a remarkable detail. These were the same pistols that had been used in the duel in which Hamilton's own son Philip had been killed 3 years earlier. Hamilton knew that. He chose to use them anyway. Burr was already on the ledge when Hamilton arrived, waiting with the controlled patience that defined him. He wore a dark coat. He had practiced his pistol shooting in the days before the duel with methodical precision. He was not, as some romantic accounts have suggested, a man consumed by rage in that moment. He was calm. He was focused. He had made his decision, and he was at peace with it. The two men took their positions 10 full paces apart. Pendleton gave the signal. Both men raised their pistols. Hamilton fired first. His shot went high and wide, clipping a cedar branch above and to the right of Burr's head. Whether this was the deliberate waste of fire he had described in his document, or whether Hamilton flinched at the last moment, or whether he aimed to wound Burr rather than kill him, is something that has been debated endlessly. What is not debated is what happened next. Burr took careful aim. He fired. The ball struck Hamilton in the right side, just above the hip, traveled upward through his body, fractured his second lumbar vertebra, and lodged in his spine. Hamilton crumpled. He fell, pitching forward, his pistol discharging into the ground as his hand clenched. Hamilton was rowed back across the river to Manhattan and carried to the home of a friend, William Bayard. He lingered for 31 hours. He was in tremendous pain. He knew he was dying from the moment the ball struck him. He asked for a clergyman. He received communion, which had been denied him earlier because of his general skepticism about organized religion. He said goodbye to his wife Elizabeth, who had been brought to his bedside. He died on the afternoon of July 12, 1804. He was 49 years old. Now here comes the turn. The moment the story shifts from tragedy to something much more complicated. Burr returned to Washington and finished his term as vice president. He presided over the Senate with such grace and composure that senators on both sides of the aisle gave him a standing ovation when he left office in March of 1805. But the legal machinery was already in motion against him. The state of New York had charged him with murder. The state of New Jersey, where the duel actually took place, had charged him with murder and with the misdemeanor of dueling. There were warrants out for his arrest. And yet, nothing happened. He was never tried. The charges in New York were eventually dropped. The New Jersey charges faded. Burr walked free. Why? Because in 1804 America, dueling existed in a strange, legal shadow zone. It was technically illegal in many states, but prosecuting prominent men for it was something courts and politicians were extremely reluctant to do. Because if you prosecuted Burr for killing Hamilton, you also had to acknowledge that Hamilton had put himself in a position to be killed, that the whole honor culture of the founding generation was implicated, that dozens of other prominent men had fought duels without consequence. The legal system looked at Aaron Burr and blinked. But while the law blinked, public opinion did not. Hamilton's death hit the American public with a force that surprised everyone, including the people who had been his fiercest political enemies. The newspapers wept. The churches held memorial services. In New York City, where Hamilton had lived and worked for most of his adult life, people mourned with an intensity that nobody had quite anticipated. Because Hamilton, for all his political controversies, represented something that people felt viscerally. He was the embodiment of the idea that a man with no birth, no money, no connections, could rise through sheer brilliance and build something that outlasted him. He was, in the most American sense possible, a self-made man. And Burr? Burr had killed him. Whatever the technicalities of the honor code, whatever the protocol of the duel, in the court of public opinion, Aaron Burr had shot and killed Alexander Hamilton, one of the founding fathers, the builder of the American economy, a man with a wife and 7 children. The revulsion was immediate and lasting. Burr's political career was, as Hamilton had perhaps calculated, finished. Not just damaged, finished. He could not return to New York or New Jersey without risking arrest. He had no future in the Democratic Republican Party, which had already discarded him. He had no future among the Federalists, who despised him. He was 50 years old, deeply in debt, politically radioactive, and facing murder charges in 2 states. It was at this point that Aaron Burr made the decision that transformed him from a controversial political figure into something that American history has never quite been able to classify. He went west. And what he did in the West in 1805 and 1806 became known as the Burr Conspiracy, which is one of the most mysterious, fascinating, and genuinely unsettling episodes in American history. Burr traveled through the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys, meeting with settlers, military officers, and prominent citizens. He corresponded secretly with the British ambassador. He met with the Spanish. He acquired land on the Bastrop Tract in what is now Louisiana. What exactly was he planning? Here is where the story becomes almost cinematic in its ambiguity. The accusations against him, made ultimately by his own co-conspirator, General James Wilkinson, who was himself secretly a paid agent of the Spanish government, were that Burr planned to detach the Western territories from the United States, combine them with Spanish Mexico, and create an independent empire with himself at the head. Burr, when he was ultimately arrested, tried for treason in 1807 and acquitted due to the extremely narrow definition of treason in the Constitution, always insisted he planned only to invade Mexico if the United States went to war with Spain, which was widely expected at the time. Think about that for a moment. The sitting vice president of the United States until just 2 years earlier was now standing trial for treason, accused of plotting to carve a personal empire out of the American West. Was he guilty? Chief Justice John Marshall, presiding over the trial, applied the constitutional definition of treason so strictly that the prosecution could not meet the evidentiary standard, and Burr was acquitted. But the acquittal did not save him. He was ruined. He spent years in Europe, trying and failing to interest Napoleon and then the British government in various schemes to detach one American territory or another. Nobody took him seriously. He came back to America years later, practiced law in New York in obscurity, lived long enough to see the rise of a kind of politics that he had helped invent, and died in 1836, 80 years old, on the same day his divorce was finalized, from a woman who had sued him for adultery. And here is the twist that the whole story has been building toward, the one that reframes everything. Think about what Hamilton actually accomplished by engineering his own martyrdom, if that is what it was. In death, he became more powerful than he had been in life. His vision for American finance, his national bank, his funded debt, his manufacturing economy, all of it survived him and eventually triumphed over the Jeffersonian agrarian dream. The very things Jefferson and Madison had tried to destroy came back again and again, building on the foundation Hamilton had laid. In a very real sense, the America of the 19th and 20th centuries, the industrial, financial, commercial superpower that emerged from the Civil War era, was Hamilton's America, far more than Jefferson's. Now consider what would have happened if Hamilton had lived and Burr had died, or if neither man had appeared on that cliff in Weehawken. Burr's Western adventures suggest that his ambitions, freed from the constraints of normal political life, bent toward something genuinely autocratic. The man who built Tammany Hall, who understood power as a machine to be constructed and operated rather than a trust to be earned, who looked at the democratic process and saw it primarily as a system to be engineered, that man, given the fluid, lawless expanses of the early American West, was capable of almost anything. Hamilton called him a potential dictator, and Hamilton was usually right about the people he feared. So here is the question that this whole story demands you sit with. Alexander Hamilton, the man who believed in law and order and strong institutions, died in what was technically a legal proceeding of honor. Aaron Burr, the man who may or may not have plotted to make himself an emperor of the American West, lived for another 32 years and died of a stroke in a hotel room in Staten Island. The Republic survived both of them. The duel that was supposed to settle the question of honor settled nothing except the direction of history. Hamilton died and became a myth. Burr lived and became a cautionary tale. Was this justice? Was it fate? Was it the calculated outcome of a man who understood that the most powerful statement he could make was to fall? You are watching this today partly because the musical Hamilton made this story viscerally alive again for millions of people, and that is wonderful. But the Broadway version and the history are not the same thing. The real Hamilton was harder, more abrasive, more ideologically rigid, and more politically ruthless than the charming genius of the stage. The real Burr was smarter, stranger, and more genuinely threatening to the Republic than the villainous foil of the musical. What this story really is, underneath all the pistols and politics and courtroom drama, is a story about what America was afraid of becoming. Hamilton feared Burr because Burr represented power without principle, organization without ideology, ambition without a governing vision of the common good. Burr feared Hamilton because Hamilton represented the insider, the man with Washington's ear and the president's trust, who could and would use institutional power to crush any rival who threatened his design for the country. Both fears were legitimate. Both men were dangerous. And the duel was, in the end, not a resolution of that conflict, but its most dramatic expression. The pistols fired. One man fell. And the Republic, that fragile, extraordinary, deeply flawed experiment in self-governance, kept going. Not because the duel made it stronger, but because the institutions Hamilton had built were already too deeply embedded to be pulled out by a bullet or a conspiracy. The National Bank survived its founder. The financial system survived its architect. The Constitution survived both the man who had argued for its ratification most brilliantly and the man who had stood trial under it for treason. That is the thing about great systems. They are designed to outlast the people who build them. And Hamilton, whatever his faults, whatever his ego, whatever dark calculation may have driven him to stand on that cliff with a pistol he intended not to fire, understood that better than anyone. He built things that were bigger than himself. And when he fell, the things he built caught him. His legacy endured in a way that Burr's never could, because Burr built machines for winning, while Hamilton built institutions for governing. And that difference between the man who wins and the man who builds is what this duel was really about. It is what American politics has always been about. The tension between the brilliant operator, the one who can move the pieces and count the votes and feel which way the wind is blowing, and the visionary, the one who looks past the next election to the next century and tries to build something that will last. Both types are necessary. Both types are dangerous when they operate without the other as a check. So what do you think? Was Hamilton a calculating political martyr who engineered his own death to destroy his greatest enemy? Was Burr a would-be tyrant whose ambition, if left unchecked, would have fractured the young republic? Or were they both just brilliant, flawed, deeply human men who took the only exit that their culture left available to them when the rage and the grief and the ambition had nowhere else to go? Was Aaron Burr the villain of this story? Or was he the man who, by killing Hamilton, inadvertently gave him the one thing Hamilton had always needed? A story clean enough to become a legend. Write that in the comments. Seriously, because this is one of those questions that does not have a clean answer, and the people who tell you it does are not paying close enough attention. Was Hamilton a hero? A martyr? Or a man who chose to die rather than admit he had spent 14 years destroying a colleague out of fear and pride? Was Burr a villain, a visionary, or simply a man who ran out of room in a republic that had decided before he ever fired a shot that it belonged to someone else? If this story grabbed you the way we think it did, subscribe to Cradle of Democracy right now, because this is what we do here. We take the stories you think you know, we pull them apart down to the bones, and we show you what was really happening underneath. And if you want to go deeper into the world of the Founding Fathers and the battles that really shaped this country, check out our video on the election of 1800, the crisis that nearly tore the Republic apart before Hamilton versus Burr even began. It is right there, waiting for you. Go watch it. You will not be disappointed.